Lauri Markkanen just received one of the biggest contract extensions of the offseason so far, and the deal officially prevents one of the most sought-after trade pieces in the entire league from being traded until the 2025 offseason. Despite the Jazz fielding offers from all around the league for Markkanen, it ultimately sounds like he's more interested in staying with the Jazz long-term, but for as good as he is he really worth this much money? After all, he's going to be making more money per year on average than some pretty big names. Notably, he's going to be making more per year than guys like Anthony Edwards, Luka Doncic, Pascal Siakam, Domantas Sabonis, and Kevin Durant. Is Lauri Markkanen a guy you really want to be paying $49 million a year? There's a harsh truth that teams have had to come to terms with throughout the 2024 offseason. If you want to keep high-quality talent that's going to hold value for the foreseeable future, you're going to have to pay. And I'm not talking about a team paying a highly flawed star an exorbitant amount of money because they're worried that if they don't, they're just going to end up letting him walk for nothing. That era of thinking is gone. I'm talking about players that can be on your team for the next 5 years and still produce at a star level, regardless of who you end up drafting or signing later on. Those are the players that teams need to start shelling out the big bucks for, and Lauri Markkanen fits that mold to a T. There might not be a more portable star player in the NBA right now than Lauri Markkanen. The amount of versatility that he offers a team is really hard to overstate. This is a bona fide 7-footer that can operate in pretty much any role that you put him in. The attribute of his that gets the most curb appeal is obviously that 3-point shooting. In a sea of guards and Jason Tatum, he's the only 7-footer that was attempting at least 8 threes a night, and he hit them at the 4th highest rate among these 16 players. And it's worth pointing out that it's not like he was just knocking down catch and shoot threes. Don't get me wrong, he absolutely was. As a matter of fact, he shot 41.4% on catch and shoot threes last season, which was good enough to put him top 5 in catch and shoot efficiency. You don't really see a ton of high volume catch and shoot guys that are 7 feet tall. And to describe Lauri Markkanen's 3-point shooting ability as him just being a spot up shooter, catch and shoot guy on the wing doesn't really do him justice. Markkanen wasn't just hitting open looks while being camped out on the wing like a normal spot up shooter. The Jazz were literally using him as a 7-foot movement shooter. It's really difficult to guard because oftentimes you have to have a big man on Lauri just due to the simple nature that at the end of the day, Lauri is a big man. But this creates all sorts of mismatch issues due to the fact that Utah runs all sorts of off-ball screening actions for him that force whatever opposing big is defending Markkanen to have to navigate screens, which isn't something centers are typically the best at because they don't have to do it very much. They make Giannis, the biggest player on the floor for Milwaukee on this possession, navigate one off-ball screen, then he has to process Markkanen initiating this DHO, but really it's just setting up another off-ball screen in the form of this flare, and even with Giannis trying to communicate the switch, it's not enough to stop Markkanen from cashing in from deep. He's bringing the ball up and he has Nick Richards on him, and Richards is going to lose Markkanen after the pass, so Sexton just goes to set this really subtle screen while Markkanen pops out, and by the time Richards realizes what's happening, it's already too late. This play is a really good example of the problems a defense encounters when trying to stop Markkanen. This is a ram exit action where Markkanen is going to set this initial pin down for Collins to set the ball screen, which is the initial ram action, allowing Sexton to drive. Markkanen is near the dunker spot, which puts Jalen Williams in a really tough position. Markkanen makes things even more difficult by getting this exit screen from Fontecchio, and Markkanen needs very little space to cash in on the look coming off the screen. He also orchestrates some of these looks himself. After coming off this initial twirl action, he's going to call for the exit screen, and while most of the defense is focused on the other side of the floor, he just pops right out and gets an easy look. It's one thing if Markkanen was operating as a wing full-time, because if that were the case, then teams could just stick their best wing defender on him and call it a day, right? Well, that's not the case, because Markkanen doesn't just operate as a perimeter wing. In fact, he actually spends a fair amount of time of his offensive possessions operating as a screener in the pick and roll, and he does it at an elite level. In fact, of all players with at least 100 possessions as the roll man in the pick and roll, he ranked 6th in points per possession with 1.35. It's worth noting that his volume is relatively low compared to some of the other more traditional rim runners that he appears next to, but those guys aren't doing the things that he's doing on the offensive end, besides a guy like Karl Anthony Towns. Him operating in the pick and roll is where you're going to see a lot of his versatility as a play finisher. He's obviously got the athleticism and frame to be able to get up and throw down lobs when he gets past his defenders on the roll, but his scoring ability on the roll is bolstered further by his shooting touch. It doesn't just extend to perimeter shooting, it also shows up a lot when he's getting downhill. If a defender manages to stay in front of him, then he's got the touch to be able to put it over top of whatever defender's there. Additionally, with the fact that he's such a good three-point shooter, he can pop after the screen and pull his defender out into space. And that's when you can really see how much he shines, creating for himself off the catch. He's far from a slow-footed big, so you end up with this 7-foot, 240-pound giant barreling towards the basket. And as a defense, that's not really the easiest thing to stay in front of. I understand that the three-point shooting is really appealing and one of the most appealing attributes about him. But at the same time, his athleticism in that frame really flies under the radar. It's not like he's just a slow-footed rim runner that also just so happens to be able to shoot threes. This is why he's listed as a wing. He spends most of his time on the wing, but he's able to oscillate back and forth between a more perimeter-oriented kind of player and an inside-the-arc big man. And earlier I made the point that Lauri Markkanen is arguably the most portable star in the NBA. What I mean by that is that whatever team you put him on, you don't have to sacrifice anything to try and accommodate his skill set. You don't have to drastically change how your team operates or drastically change how your team is constructed in order to still get the most out of him. You can use him in so many different ways, or literally just use him as a play finisher, and you're still gonna get elite production out of him. You can really see this when you look at how many points he's generating per touch. He's generating the second most points per touch in the NBA of guys averaging 23 or more, behind only Joel Embiid. Now, obviously, he's not shouldering the offensive burden that a lot of the guys he's listed here with are shouldering, but this ability to make the most out of such a small number of touches per game is a massive testament to how Markkanen is truly a plug-and-play star. And it's important to keep in mind that he's doing all of this while being the first option for the Utah Jazz. There are a lot of players that benefit from having teammates that demand a ton of defensive attention, so they end up getting a ton of easy looks. But Markkanen's getting a ton of defensive attention already because he's the number one option for the Jazz, and he's still able to be this productive. And I think the Jazz have really set themselves up well with this extension, because it doesn't really matter if they win the lottery next year and they end up being able to draft a guy like Cooper Flagg. It doesn't matter if they end up not getting a desirable pick in the lottery next year. Because with Lauri Markkanen, it doesn't matter who he's playing next to, because his skill set is so translatable in any team context that it doesn't really matter who you draft or who you sign. If the Jazz want to be competitive sooner rather than later, it's not going to be overcrowded with Markkanen there, because his skills just don't really clash with other players. He can fit well regardless of what direction Utah wants to go. And guess what? Even if Utah ends up having to tank for longer and they end up wanting to trade Markkanen down the road like it seems like they were going to, well, everything I've said in this video so far still applies. And that means just about every team in the NBA is going to be picking up their phone trying to make a deal for him. Just because he's making $49 million a year now doesn't mean that teams have suddenly lost interest in adding his skill set to their team. He's still going to be producing at a star caliber level, and I don't think that price tag is going to be much of a hindrance if he ever became available again. All Utah did was secure Lauri as a long-term asset that can help them go through a rebuild, win now, or win later. Really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, I'd appreciate it if you considered leaving a like and subscribing. It seriously helps me out so much. Regardless, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.